Fit like ladies and gentlemen, loons and quines, and abdy else that's watching. My name is Pauline Cordiner and I'm a storyteller from the northeast of Scotland. And I've been asked to record a few wee stories for the TMSA for the Keith Festival. And this one is for the bairns Kayleigh. Now, when I was choosing my stories, I thought, what's going to inspire me? And had a wee think about all the wee lanies in Keith that got their new names, a wee few years ago. And this one is been inspired by Weaver's Lane, because the lady in the story is a weaver and she's also a very, very clever woman. Now, this story isn't from the northeast. I'm going to take you far, far away from the northeast, far away from Scotland, off to the east, into the east, into the south, to a country called Armenia. Now, if you want to look it up in the map, Armenia is east of Turkey, south of Georgia and Azerbaijan, and that is where this story comes from. But our story doesn't start off with that wise lady who was a weaver. It starts off with a prince, Prince Vatigan. Now, Prince Vatigan's mother had been on at him, as had his father. You need to get yourself married. You need to get married so that we know that you and your queen and some children that might come are there to rule the kingdom when we are too old. And she would go on and on at him. But Prince Vatigan, he wasn't in the slightest bit interested in getting married. He would make excuses upon excuses not to marry this princess or not to marry this lady or that. The thing that he thought was he was too young and he wanted to enjoy himself and do whatever he wanted to. Well, who doesn't? One of the things that he enjoyed doing best was going hunting. And he and his best friend Nazar would go out on their horses and they would go deep, deep into the forests to hunt. And this was a useful hobby because you could also bring back a wee bit of food for the table back in the palace. And they'd been riding hard and fast one day, and it was a hot, hot day. And even though they were in the deep forest, the sun was still beating down. By the time they came out the other forest and looked out into this great big desert valley, oh, well, they were fair pecked, but it was so hot that they needed something to drink. And the Tsar pointed down into the valley because down in there was a wee village full of lots and lots of wee huses and maybe a few shops and an inn. But they knew that right in the middle of that village that there would be a well. They knew there would be a well dug deep, deep down through the stone into a cool, crisp underground stream. Oh, and they thought of that water and how thirsty they were. So down they went into the village. And they approached the well, which they immediately spotted right in the centre of the village, because that was why the village was there. There wouldn't be water just handy anywhere, so the village had grown up around the well. They headed towards the well, and sitting next to the well was this beautiful young woman who had a gaggle of children round her feet. Well, as soon as she saw these well-dressed gentlemen, she got up and she walked towards the well and she started to turn the handle that brought up the bucket of cold, cold water, and they thanked her for this. Then she took 2 cups, dipped them into the bucket, held them out to the pair, and just as they were reaching out for the glasses, the cups of cold water, sploosh, she tipped them onto the ground. Well, how rude, thought Vatigan. But she dipped in the cups again and again. Here were 2 beautiful cold cups of water, and she was just about to hand it to them when she turned them upside down. Sploosh! They went onto the ground as well. 5 times she did this, until finally, just as they were just about furious, she took another scoop and another scoop of water, handed both cups to the men, and this time they were allowed to drink. And it was, beautiful, cold, clear water, and it refreshed them greatly. And when they'd finished drinking, they handed the cups back to her, and Vatican said, "Tell me, we were thirsty, we were tired. Why did you pour the cold water onto the ground?" And she said, "Gentlemen, I took one look at you and knew that you were clearly higher class than me. more delicate, maybe even royal perhaps. And so I knew that if you drank such cold, cold water when you were so, so hot, then surely it would disagree with you and you would collapse. I waited until you had cooled down slightly and the water had warmed up slightly. Well, that was very clever of you, said Vatican. And oh yes, Nazar agreed. What a clever woman, he said, nudging Vatican. And beautiful too. She said. Thank you. And tell me, might I have the pleasure of your name? And he said, you first. You first. What is your name? Why, she said, my name is Anahit. And might I know what your name is? Vatican tossed back his beautiful black locks and he said, no. And he got back upon his horse and Nazar shrugged and followed Vatican. Anahit thought, well, he was rude, but not much ruder than many people that come to our village. And she sat down and she finished teaching the children. And then she went back off to the home where she lived with her father and she started to weave because she was a weaver. She had a great big loom set up in their house and they would weave carpets, and such a talented weaver was she and so knowledgeable was she that her weavings, her carpets were of such quality that she would weave entire stories into the fibres, secret words and symbols, so that if you knew, you could read a whole story in the weavings. About a week later, Vatican's mother went to his chamber and he was lying there with a dreamy look on his face. Are you ill? She said. Is everything okay? You've been off your food. Vatican, yeah, right. And he went, oh, Mother, I am perfectly well. I am in love. Love, she said. Oh, I thought you were nae whale. Oh, well, she was absolutely delighted at this. She was no longer fussed about marrying a princess or a lady or a duchess or anything like that. No, anybody would do. Who's the lucky young lady, says the queen. Well, Mother, she's a poor girl, but she's awful clever. Well then, I think you had better go and see about asking for her hand in marriage, don't you? Said the queen. So, Vatican got Nazar, who was quite high up in the palace, and his best friend, as you know, to go off and ask for Anahit's hand in marriage, because it wouldn't do for the prince himself to go. And so Nazar turned up in the village and he asked around, I'm looking for a beautiful lady with long, wavy, dark hair. We saw her with children and they said, oh, that'll be Anahit's. She's a poor shepherd's daughter and she lives in that hut over there. But dinna disturb her if she's at her weaving. But Nazar had a job to do, so off he went and he rapped at the door and out came this decrepit old man. Yes, he said, I'm here to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. Oh, for you? Said the old man. No, it is not for myself, said Nazar, bowing very low, very low. It's for the prince, Prince Vatican. He would like to marry your daughter. Well, what are you asking me for? Said the old man. You had better go and ask my daughter. But isn't it the tradition for the father to agree? It might be the tradition in our country, but it's not the tradition with my daughter Anahit. In you go. And so Nazar went in, and he went into the room that she used for her weaving, and there it was. It was a great big window to let in as much light as possible. And she turned and she recognised the man. She said, you're one of the ones that came to the village for the water the other day. Yes, he said. The man I was with, my master, my friend, is Prince Vatican, and he would like your hand in marriage. Me, she said, but the village needs me. But the prince needs you more. He saw how wise you were. He saw how you stood up to him, and he admires that, and he thinks that you would make a good queen, and he thinks you're beautiful besides. She said, Very well, and she turned back to her weaving. Nazar didn't know quite what to do. He cleared his throat and she turned and she said, "Tell me, what job does the prince do?" "Job?" said Nazar. Job? Well, he's the prince." "That is not a job," she said. "Can he cook? Can he build things with his hands, with wood? Is he a jeweler? Can he weave?" "No," said Nazar. "He is the prince." "Well, then tell him I will not marry a man who does not work for a living, a man who does not have a trade. When he has a trade, he may come back and ask again. Now, if you excuse me, I need to finish a little bit of this before I go out and teach the children." Nazar was shocked. Imagine turning down the prince's hand. She would have been rich. She would have been comfortable for the rest of her life. Instead, she sat indoors, slaving away over her weaving, with no prospects other than looking after her old father in poverty, with no money. And he said, "Teach the children?" "Oh yes," she said. "I'm teaching them to read and write." And if her refusal had been odd, then this was even odder, because back then royalty could read and write, but the poor people could not. "Why are you teaching them to read and write?" he said. "I think it would be awful if they could not," she said. "Look again when you leave our village. Every single surface has been written on somehow. We write and we read. If you look at stones outside the village, the shepherds scratch into them. If you look at tree trunks, the children write on them with charcoal. It is the future for the people of your country to be able to read and write. I never heard of such a thing. When did reading and writing ever save anyone?" Anahit turned back to her weaving, and Nazar knew it was time to leave. "I will return," he shouted as he left, "when the prince has made his decision." Nazar returned to the palace, and he said to the prince, "She will not marry you unless you have a trade, unless you have a job." "Okay," said Vatican. "Which trade should I do?" "You're not serious," said Nazar. "Of course I am," said Vatican. "What did she do?" "Well, she was weaving, and the weaving, it was so beautiful. I could see there were symbols and words. I didn't get the chance to read it, but it looked like there was a whole story woven into her carpet." "Then I shall become a weaver," said Vatican. And so within a few weeks, some of the best teachers from Persia had arrived, and they were teaching Vatican how to weave. And after a few days, Nazar sat and he joined and he learned as well. Weeks passed, months passed, a year passed. And when his training was over, Prince Vatican produced the most beautiful piece of cloth from the most expensive coloured silks and gold thread. He wove a blanket which was sent to Anahit. And when she unwrapped this gift, which Nazar handed to her beaming, she smiled and she smiled. The quality, the workmanship, but he had written his proposal into the weaving. No one else would have known that it was there. Nobody who couldn't read or write or who knew the symbols, who knew the craftsmanship of weaving. And so Anahit went to the palace where she married Prince Vatican. There were days and days of feasting and rejoicing, and everybody was happy. And the story could have ended there, but it does not. You see, there was only one thing that made the couple sad on their wedding day, and that was that Nazar was not there. He had vanished. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew where he had gone. But things move on. After about 3 years, the Queen and the King decided that they would retire. Vatican became king, Anahit became queen, and they ruled wisely. But one day he came to her side and he said, I always come to you when I am troubled. I always come to you when I need your cleverness. Do you think that the people respect me? Do they like me? Am I doing a good job as king? Am I as good a king as my father? Well, the only way you would find that out, she smiled, would be if you went and asked them. But what poor person would tell the king that he wasn't doing a good job? She said you could go in amongst the people disguised. And so it was that Prince Vatican dressed himself as a merchant, as a salesman, and he went out in amongst the people. And he would speak to them. He only had a couple of guards with him, but he would go and he would sit in a tavern and he would discuss how things were going in the communities. And he found out that they thought of him, which was a good thing. They thought he was doing a good job. One day he strolled into this big city. It was another big city within the country. And he drew the attention of some men who followed him through the marketplace. One of the men approached him and said, are you a merchant? Oh, yes, I am a merchant, said Vatican, yes. Well, then come with me, for our master wishes to trade with you. And they took Vatican and his men deeper and deeper and deeper into the marketplace, so that Vatican was soon lost, and down an alleyway and down an alleyway, and it grew darker and darker and darker until finally a door was open and Vatican and his soldiers, his protectors, were shoved inside. As soon as they were in there, sharp knives were pointed at their throats and they were forced into a dark room. Here, a man with a long beard looked at them thoughtfully, and he looked into Vatican's face and said, you're mine now. You are my prisoner, and you will work for me. You will work for me until there is no more work left in you. Now, do you have a trade? Panicking, Vatican said, yes, and he said, good, because any man that we capture who does not have a trade is of no use to us, if you get my meaning. And so they took Vatican and they said to him, what is your trade? And he said, I'm a weaver. I am a weaver. I can weave the finest cloth. I can weave with silk and I can weave with gold. And they threw him into a room full of other weavers. These were men who hadn't seen outside light in many months. They were thin and they were dirty. They were obviously being kept there against their wills, and they worked hour after hour after hour, not knowing if it was day or night, making goods for these people to sell. One man in the corner looked at him with big eyes full of hope, and Vatican realised that this was Nazar. This was why Nazar had gone missing. Together they spoke until they came up with a plan. Calling over one of the guards, Nazar said, my friend here, my new friend, he wishes to talk to your leader. Vatican was brought in front of the leader and he said, I am not an ordinary weaver. My work is of such quality. I can put magical, secret words into my weaving. Will be so beautiful, so beautiful. You will get so much more money than the gold and the silks you buy. Oh, who would buy something like that? Said the leader of the men. Oh, none other than our queen. She would buy it instantly. She would recognize its quality, and I promise you, she would give you bags upon bags of gold. And they agreed, and they brought silk, and they brought gold thread to Vatican, who sat to work. And with Nazar's help, he created the most beautiful brocade, a beautiful piece of cloth that it would have shone in the sunlight had any sunlight been able to get in. And when it was finished, well, one of the evil men took it, and he took it all the way to the palace. Vachigan had been gone now 10 more days than he had intended. And Anahit was pacing back and forth, back and forth. The people were happy with their queen ruling, but they would soon get suspicious. Where was their king? And when these men came wanting to sell her cloth, she did not want to see them. "Oh, but please, please," said the man selling the cloth. "I was promised that only the queen would be able to appreciate the secret words within this brocade." She heard it, and she said, "Bring that man to me right now. I will see his cloth." And it was rolled out in front of her, and there she could see the handiwork of none other than her husband. And within the cloth she read the words, "I am being held. These men have hundreds of us. We are slaves. They will kill us in the end. You must follow them and set us free." "I will buy it from you," she said. She handed over bags of gold, and the man left with his eyes gleaming. Anahit took no time in gathering armour and gathering weapons and gathering her soldiers, and at a distance they followed the man across the land and back to the city that he came from, where Vachigan and Nazar and everybody else was being held captive. And with the queen in her armour, with her sword and her shield at the front, they broke in, and the men were taken and arrested. And Vachigan and Nazar and all the other men came out blinking into the sunshine. They were immediately washed, they were immediately fed, their hearts were taken care of. And Vachigan put his arms around his wife, and he said, "You were wise, you were wise, you are wise." And Nazar nudged his friend, and he said, "Do you know what? Can't believe your wife saved us just now." "My wife saved us just now?" "No, my wife saved us when she insisted that I was able to do a trade, to make something with my hands." And so there you are. That is the story of Queen Anahit. And I think she's awesome. I really like her. I like how, she can weave and she can teach and she can fight and she's clever. And that is one of my favourite stories. And when I read the names of the lanes and I remembered Weaver's Lane, I thought there's a perfect story for you. I hope you really enjoyed the story and enjoy the rest of the TMSA Keith Festival. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.